There's a moment in life when desperation starts to feel like normal, when the crushing weight of every missed opportunity and bad decision seeps into your bones and you stop noticing it, like a second skin you've always worn. And for me, that moment settled in sometime after the 3rd month without work. After the garage let me go and my savings dried up and the landlord started banging on the door with fists full of final warnings. And I wasn't alone in that pit either. Caleb and Jody were right there with me, all of us stuck in that nowhere town tucked deep into the folds of the Appalachian countryside, a place with more rust than hope, where the trees grew thick and close and whispered things on the wind if you listened too long. And on one of those long nights, sitting outside on Caleb's uncle's porch with a case of beer we could barely afford, the kind that tastes like warm metal but gets the job done, we talked about how we were running out of time, out of options, out of reasons to keep pretending things were fine. And that's when Caleb told us about a flyer he'd seen down by the old gas station near the highway, half torn and rain-soaked but still legible, a notice for night shift caretakers at some private estate out past Miller's Ridge, way out where the paved roads turned to gravel and the gravel turned to dirt, and then the dirt turned into nothing but forest. It sounded too good to be real. $200 a night per person. Housing included, 3-week contract with a bonus at the end, paid in cash, no background checks or experience needed, just a willingness to stay up all night and keep things in order. And even though Jody laughed it off and called it sketchy as hell, I saw something change in her eyes when she thought we weren't looking. That same quiet dread we all had, the knowledge that if we didn't take something soon, we'd all be sleeping in our cars or worse. And so after a little arguing and a lot of silent nods, we decided to call the number on the flyer and see what happened. The man who answered spoke in a voice like dry leaves and old wood, slow and formal and without any accent I could place. He didn't ask our names or backgrounds, just said we were exactly the kind of people they'd been hoping for, and gave us an address to meet at the following evening, a spot in the woods with no cell signal, no buildings, nothing but a narrow road choked by trees and mist. And when we got there just after sunset, a black town car rolled up from the dark like it had grown out of the woods, spotless and silent, with a man in a suit who never gave his name just nodded at us and opened the door. And from that moment on, I felt like we were falling into something we wouldn't be able to climb back out of. The drive took over an hour, though it felt much longer, winding through forests that seemed to press against the windows as if listening, until we finally pulled up to the mansion, and that word doesn't really do it justice. It was a cathedral of wood and stone carved into the hills, older than anything I'd ever seen in person, covered in moss and ivy and whispering with wind that didn't match the weather. The lights inside flickered like candles, though the man assured us the place had full electricity. And as we stepped out and looked up at the towering windows and crumbling chimneys, I felt the first true prick of fear deep in my chest, not because the place looked haunted, but because it felt alive, like it had been waiting for us. The front doors opened before we touched them, and inside we were met by a woman named Miss Delaney, middle-aged and pale, dressed in black from neck to ankles, with a voice like ice cracking in still water. She led us to a parlor where we were handed contracts, thick papers full of vague clauses and strange symbols, but we signed without reading, because that's what desperate people do. And once the ink dried, she handed us each a laminated card with a list of rules, 10 in total, and told us we must memorize them before nightfall, and we'd be tested not with questions, but with consequences. Then she smiled like a puppet being forced to perform and left us alone in the room. The rules read like something from a horror movie. Rule 1. Never open the front doors after midnight, no matter who knocks. Rule 2. If the mirrors start fogging on their own, do not look directly into them. Rule 3. Always announce yourself before entering any room, even if you believe you are alone. Rule 4. If you hear scratching from inside the walls, do not acknowledge it. Rule 5. Between 3 a.m. and 3:33 a.m., do not speak, no matter what you hear. Rule 6. The library must remain locked after dusk. If it's open, do not enter. Rule 7. If the grandfather clock chimes more than 12 times, hide immediately. Rule 8. Do not go near the pond behind the mansion under any circumstance. Rule 9. You may see someone who looks like one of us in the halls at night. Ignore them. Rule 10. If you find yourself outside and don't remember how you got there, do not come back inside until sunrise. We laughed at first, nervously, half convinced it was some kind of rich person's prank, a game for their amusement. But the way Miss Delaney looked at us when she handed out the rules made the hairs on my neck stand up. And when she said, "Welcome to the night shift," as the sun disappeared behind the hills, the last thing I saw through the dusty window was a figure standing just beyond the tree line, motionless, watching. And though the others didn't see it, I couldn't shake the feeling that it had been waiting not just for any of us, but for me. The first night in the mansion didn't feel like the beginning of a job. It felt like the start of something we weren't meant to survive. Not in the dramatic horror movie way, but in the slow, gnawing way where things shift behind your back and the walls feel like they're breathing with you, where time loses weight and the air tastes like it remembers things you shouldn't. And after Miss Delaney disappeared down one of the endless hallways, we were left standing in the parlor, surrounded by antique furniture that looked untouched by time. The kind of pieces you'd find in a museum or the home of someone who thought ghosts made good company. And we didn't speak for a long minute, just looked at each other and then at the list of rules again, trying to laugh it off, trying to act like we weren't scared shitless. But Caleb, who'd always been the boldest of us, kept glancing at the fireplace like something inside it had whispered his name, and Jody was unusually quiet, her eyes scanning the corners of the room like she expected to see something crawl out from under the rugs. Eventually, we started exploring the mansion, our assigned duties laughably vague. Check the windows, patrol the halls, make sure the generator doesn't fail, log any unusual occurrences in the journal beside the front desk. Simple tasks that became anything but once the sun was gone and the house began to change. Because when night fell, the silence wasn't just silence, it was a pressure, thick and hungry. And the darkness didn't just fill the spaces between the walls, it filled us too, made us second-guess every sound, every shadow, and the old grandfather clock in the main hall ticked with the rhythm of something alive. Something counting down to a moment we didn't understand. And around midnight we split up against our better judgment. Caleb headed to check the windows on the west wing, Jody took the east side, and I volunteered to check the upstairs halls and make sure the attic remained locked. And as I walked past the portraits lining the staircase, I swear their eyes shifted to follow me. Not in a cartoonish, haunted house way, but in that slow, deliberate way living people watch something suspicious. And I tried not to think about it, tried to focus on the creaking of my boots on the hardwood, but every so often I'd hear something soft and wet behind the walls, like something crawling through pipes that didn't exist. And I remembered Rule 4, do not acknowledge the scratching in the walls, and clenched my teeth until I passed it. The attic door was shut, locked, undisturbed, but there was a smell coming from behind it, like earth and copper, like something had been buried behind it long ago, and I turned back quickly, heading down the hallway when I passed the first mirror, tall and oval and framed in dark wood carved with roses, and I stopped because the glass was fogged, a thick, breathy haze covering the reflection, even though the hall was cold and still. And that's when I remembered Rule 2. If the mirrors start fogging on their own, do not look directly into them. But I was already staring at it, frozen, watching as the fog began to clear from the inside, as if someone behind the glass was wiping it away slowly, and behind the smear I saw a face that looked like mine, but the eyes were too dark, the mouth just slightly wrong, and I looked away fast, heart pounding, stumbling backward and knocking over a table that shattered on the floor. I ran downstairs and nearly collided with Jody, who looked pale and shaken, said she heard someone humming in one of the locked rooms, a tune she remembered her mother singing when she was a kid, even though her mother had been dead for 5 years. And then Caleb joined us, wide-eyed, saying he thought he saw Miss Delaney walking down the corridor, only she wasn't wearing the same clothes, and didn't respond when he called out, just turned her head slowly, too slowly, and grinned without showing any teeth before vanishing into the study. The three of us huddled near the main hall, unsure whether to flee or pretend things were normal, and that's when the grandfather clock began to chime. 1, 2, 3, and we all turned to stare at it as it kept going. 4, 5, 6, the sound growing heavier with each strike, echoing off the walls and vibrating through our skulls. 7, 8, 9. We remembered Rule 7, if the clock chimes more than 12 times, hide immediately. And I grabbed Jodi's hand and pulled her behind the heavy drapes near the window, while Caleb ducked into the coat closet. 10, 11, 12, and then a 13th chime hit like thunder. And the lights in the mansion flickered and died, plunging us into blackness so complete it felt like drowning. And in the silence that followed, I heard something step into the room. Slow, dragging footsteps across the floor, breathing that wasn't human, too deep, too wet, and I saw a shape through the slit in the curtain, tall and crooked, and its limbs too long, its head brushing the ceiling. And it paused where we'd just been standing, sniffing the air like it knew we were close, then let out a low sound like wood splitting, and moved on. We stayed hidden long after the sound faded, not daring to speak until the lights flickered back to life. And when we emerged, Caleb was pale, trembling, his eyes darting to the shadows. And he wouldn't say what he saw in the closet, only that it touched him, not with hands but with thoughts, and that he could still feel it behind his eyes. And when we checked the clock, it had stopped ticking, frozen at 3 a.m., and that's when we all went silent, because Rule 5, between 3 a.m. and 3:33 a.m., do not speak no matter what you hear, flashed through our minds at once, and in that half hour we heard voices outside calling our names, soft and pleading, like our parents, our friends, people we hadn't spoken to in years. And though our throats ached to respond, we stayed silent. And when the time passed and the clock began again, we looked at each other and knew without speaking that the rules weren't suggestions. They were warnings, and this place wasn't testing us. It was hunting us, slowly, patiently, waiting for us to slip. We thought we could handle it, that if we followed every rule, stayed alert, stayed together, we might make it through the 3 weeks, take the cash and run, never speak of it again. But that was before Caleb broke Rule 6, before he opened the library door just to see what was inside. And I'll never forget the way his voice sounded when he called us in the middle of the night, shaking, whispering over the radio that he'd just peeked, just cracked the door for a second, and I was already running down the hall, Jodi on my heels, because the library had always been off limits after dusk, and we didn't know why. But we were about to find out. And when we got there, Caleb was standing in the hall, eyes wide, sweat dripping down his face like he'd run through a thunderstorm, and he kept saying the same thing over and over. I didn't mean to go in. I didn't mean to go in. And I looked past him into the open library, and something was wrong with the room, not visually. It looked the same as before, tall shelves, hundreds of books, old lamps glowing weakly, but the air was different, heavier, like breathing in fog laced with ash. And the sound, that was the worst part. It was so quiet it was loud, a humming just beneath the surface of everything, like the mansion was holding its breath and waiting. And Caleb said he heard a voice in there, not someone calling him, not someone human, but something that offered him something, made promises he couldn't repeat because his mouth wouldn't form the words, and I pulled him back, slammed the door shut, and locked it. And when I looked at Jodi, I saw the fear set in, real fear, the kind you feel when you know something's been awakened, something ancient and watching. And later that night we found the first message scratched into the walls of the guest room, not written in ink or paint, but carved in splinters, deep and angry. One rule broken, one will vanish. And we didn't sleep after that, not even when the sun came up, because the rules weren't just rules, they were boundaries, cages keeping whatever lived in that place from touching us. And now the cage had cracked, and something was slipping through. The next night came too fast, dragging its cold breath through the windows and settling into our bones. And none of us spoke of the message on the wall. Not really, because we didn't know how to say what we were all thinking, that one of us was going to disappear, and there was nothing we could do about it. We stayed in the parlor together, backs to the fire, eyes on every shadow, and Caleb kept pacing like a man waiting for the noose, muttering under his breath, sometimes stopping to stare at the windows like something was tapping on the other side that only he could hear. And Jody kept checking the clock, over and over, as if time could save us, as if watching the hands would hold the dark at bay. And when the lights flickered just before midnight, we all flinched, because we'd started to feel the mansion's pulse, its moods, its quiet hunger when a rule was broken. And somewhere past the east wing, the humming started again. The same deep thrumming sound Caleb had heard from the library, except now we all could hear it, low and distant and getting closer, and then the air got colder. Not normal cold, but that sudden vacuum chill that presses into your chest and makes it hard to breathe. And Caleb stood up, eyes wide and full of something like regret or surrender, and said, "I think it's coming for me." And we begged him not to say that, told him he was fine, that we'd figure it out, but he was already walking away, back toward the library, slow and quiet like a man walking into his own grave. And we followed at a distance because we couldn't let him go alone. And when he reached the library door, still locked, still sealed, the humming stopped, replaced by silence so thick it rang in my ears. And then the door creaked open on its own, no wind, no hand touching it. And something was waiting inside, something we couldn't see but we felt it. Every cell in my body screamed to run, but my feet stayed planted, and Caleb looked back once, gave us a weak smile and said, "I just wanted to fix it." And then he stepped inside, and the door shut behind him like the mansion had swallowed him whole. And we ran to it, banged on the wood, screamed his name. But there was nothing, no sound, no answer. And when we opened the door, it was just a library again, empty, quiet, untouched, and Caleb was gone. No trace, no sign, like he'd never existed. And later, back in the parlor, a new rule had been added to our laminated cards. Rule 11, if one is taken, never say their name again, or it will remember you too. And I saw that Jody had already scratched Caleb's name off her page, shaking, lips pressed shut, like if she opened them, she'd scream forever. And I understood. I did the same. And we lasted 4 more nights before Jody started talking in her sleep, whispering to someone who wasn't there, laughing softly like a child being led by the hand. And then I woke up one evening and she was gone. And the only thing left on her bed was her laminated card, with all the rules scratched out except one. Rule 12. If you are the last, stay until your time is done. And now I sit alone in this massive, breathing house, listening to it settle, waiting for the next night, because I don't know what happens if I try to leave. I don't know where they went or what waits in the rooms I no longer enter, and I'm too afraid to find out. So I walk the halls in silence, check the windows, avoid the mirrors, speak to no one, and follow the rules. Always follow the rules because the mansion is patient, but it never forgets.